Welcome everybody to Building Forward, which is Visionality's monthly conversation on all things nonprofit. I am Katie Pearson. I'm the Senior Project Manager of Fundraising at Visionality, and I'm subbing in for Emily today. With me today is Lauren Trujillo, who is the Executive Director over at the Santa Barbara Public Library Foundation, and Patricia Schwartz, a fellow consultant and amazing executive coach. And we're here today to talk about modernizing the donor pyramids. And before we really jump in, I'm just going to do like a really brief overview of what the traditional pyramid looks like before we talk about why we want to kind of revamp it and why it needs a little bit of help. So when we say donor pyramids, we mean two things. We mean the moves management pyramid within normal development operations. We also mean the capital campaign pyramid. So both of these kind of sit people within this pyramid shape based on their level of financial contribution. So the higher the dollar amount, the higher within the pyramid they sit. Organizations typically have several smaller gifts, which make up that big foundation at the bottom. And as those gift numbers go up, the number of donors kind of decrease, thus creating that pyramid shape. Within capital campaigns, you place people within that pyramid to make up your goal overall, but again, sticking kind of with that pyramid format. And then with moves management, the goal is really to start people at their level and really increase them up that pyramid. So with that very basic and brief overview of what a pyramid is, because truly it's something that us fundraising professionals talk a lot about, learned a lot about as we developed our career. I really want to turn it over to both you, Patricia and Lauren, and ask why you guys think we need to kind of modernize this staple that's kind of been around for a long time in fundraising.
Absolutely. So I will start us off. Again, my name is Lauren Trujillo. I'm with the Santa Barbara Public Library Foundation. I am the foundation director and have been the key fundraiser with this organization for the past 5 years. We've gone through a $5 million capital campaign for the Michael Tobes Library Plaza and an additional $1 million campaign for an endowment. And I'd like to speak to my experience with the capital campaign and how I've integrated a lot of this thinking or poking and reimagining of how I was introduced to the donor pyramid, how we ended up using it in our project, and what's pushed me to kind of evolve it in my mind as I've continued my fundraising work. So we entered into the capital campaign for the Michael Tobes Library Plaza during the pandemic. And we worked with consultants, Netzel Grigsby Associates, and really enjoyed our experience with them. But we were working with a format of capital campaign fundraising that has been grounded in long history of methods and methodology, and wasn't really prepared for something like the pandemic to adapt to. But what we did was we continued forward with the capital campaign, launching in May of 2020, and decided to go on. And what the opportunity of going into a capital campaign during the pandemic, what it provided was an opportunity to rethink how these models and long-term methodologies could be practiced or rethought. We really had an opportunity to think differently. And I say this because when we went into this capital campaign, we went and looked at our pyramid. We were going to start from the top key people and work our way down, all fundraising via Zoom. And what we ended up being able to try differently, and while there was some initial pushback at first, was going into a naming opportunity effort, but rather than keeping it to one solo major donor, we looked at it as an opportunity to be a call out to the community to support more of an idea more of a call to action for those who felt moved by the concept of naming this in honor of Michael Tobes. The Tobes family did not donate $2 million to reach that naming opportunity, but it was an opportunity to call out to people impacted by this person to really deliver the message of what a community space would be. And it evolved what would typically be that pyramid of starting with the highest capacity folks and working down. Really, we had to adjust and bring in people at a lot of different levels while still going down the pyramid in our regular campaign efforts. And we also approached that same community method with another opportunity in honor of a significant contributor to education in our community, philanthropist, and was able to cultivate other supporters around his efforts for education and support. And so what I got out of this experience and going into this capital campaign and pushing back on the status quo of what I was told, this is how it's always been done, and you're taking a risk by inviting these lower level people into this space at this time, I was able to disprove them and show that this is a way to approach a more community centric model within the donor pyramid. And so I've just been introduced to this idea of community-centric fundraising, and I do want to share this definition of community-centric fundraising. Community-centric fundraising is a fundraising model that is grounded in equity and social justice. We prioritize the entire community over individual organizations, foster a sense of belonging and interdependence, present our work not as individual transactions, but holistically, and encourage mutual support between nonprofits. And that's truly what these efforts allowed us to do without me having the language to adapt to the pyramid, but we were able to open it up to the community in a time where people were seeking community. And I would say that's really what we were able to learn out of the pandemic and out of a standard model. So I am now engaging this in a lot of different ways we do our fundraising. I approach the donor pyramid in this community-centric framework for all of our small campaigns. How can we make it more of a call to action for every level and dismantle this methodology that you have to start at a certain space, but encourage different people to participate at different levels and really pivot what we consider high capacity and engage all at those different levels. And really that kind of transitions great, I think, into what Patricia has been thinking about and working on for years in her experience. I'm newer to this field in the sense of going through a capital campaign and having that lived experience. But then I went back and got my CFRE after the capital campaign in 2021 and going through the certified fundraising executive credential, going and reading the books, taking the 200 question test, and understanding what kind of the book smarts are that align with the capital campaign affirmed my understanding that this methodology is what is shared as the best practices and what is being standardized and taught. And there's ways to push back and rethink it that aren't necessarily in the documentation of how we've standardized things as a sector. So I think there's room for us to evolve. There's room to question and grow and change what we've known as fundraisers as the way to approach things. So I again, I want to pass it to Patricia, who's been giving lots of thought to these types of issues. And aside from my case study, how we can look at this in all aspects of our fundraising thinking and just donor engagement, volunteer engagement, many layers of those aspects.
Yeah.
So I will pass it to Patricia. Yeah.
And just to give Patricia a proper like preference, she is literally writing the book on this. So I'm super excited that she's here, and we'll even get to maybe see a sneak peek of her model. So yeah, Patricia, I would love to hear your thoughts on it.
Thank you, Katie. Can you hear me? Because I had to put this
Yes.
on because they're doing construction outside. Okay, I am in the editing process of a book, and I really want to call out that Pat Snyder is on this call, and she has written a section, a contribution to the book related to planned giving. So I'm just really happy that Pat is here. And so, yeah, I think that things changed in our lives in the world, and they've been changing more and more rapidly over like the last decade, but obviously the last 4 years were unbelievable. And when the world changes, I think our systems and our structures need to adjust to respond to what's going on in the world. And really so much has happened. The sort of my perspective is that what Lauren did is, a response to some of the social changes that are happening. And I'm happy to say that the model that I created, which I will show a slide in a few minutes, it does allow, it's a model for engagement. And engagement is the first thing that needs to happen before you can raise money. You can't just call people up. Like I think one of my first employers said, well, just call these people up and ask them for money. I'm like, I don't think so. Like, that doesn't really work, So engagement is extremely important, and a process for engagement is important. So, I was raised in all the pyramids, the moves management pyramid, as well as capital campaign pyramid. I don't usually focus on capital campaigns. I focus on major gifts in my nonprofit coaching and, facilitation and training and strategic planning, everything I do for nonprofits, but in my other realm, which I also work for businesses, and I also focus on engagement, a different kind of engagement there. So engagement is the thing that builds communities. Whether you're a nonprofit and you want to build your community, or honestly, you're like Women's Economic Ventures. They launch all these businesses. Well, those women need to build community too, and they need engagement too. So this model, interestingly, I figured out works everywhere. So engagement is the first step, and then you can go through a process. My model is based in stories, which means that I have particular types of questions that organizations can ask to community members that they want to engage. That could be high-level donors, mid-level, that could be, underrepresented populations, which is something we ask these story-generating questions when I do strategic planning. We go out into the community and we ask story-generating questions about the impact of either the organization or the topic on that person. And we get personal, real, powerful stories. These stories really inform the model because people are allowed to tell them. When they tell a story, when somebody tells a story, if it's to a potential donor, that donor gets more engaged. Then when we ask the donor, what made them make the gift? What is their experience with our organization? Or what is their experience with the topic that the organization, the cause that the organization focuses on? Some of you may remember Jim Bauer. He, launched the Bauer Foundation. So I had the opportunity to talk with him many years ago. And this was right before I started working on putting these ideas into a form. But I asked him, tell me about your best experience in the nonprofit realm as a philanthropist. What is it for you that makes this really meaningful? Why do you do it? I mean, he told me the most moving, incredible story actually about when he was a child in Germany, I believe, or Austria after World War II, and how the Americans came in, and there were certain organizations that were like nonprofits that came in and fed his family because they had absolutely nothing. They had nothing. So, he told that story. He was extremely visibly moved as he told me this story. And I could see how his values translate to his work. And this is such a common experience that when, let's say, I ask a donor for an organization that question, they tell a story that they've never even told anybody because nobody asked them. If we don't ask people, they won't tell these stories. The stories engage them. Now, what if you have a major donor who then is willing to tell the story at a big event? Their story about why they give that is very moving and powerful at a big event. You know the impact of that? It's really powerful. And it's the opposite kind of impact as when a beneficiary tells their story. It's people relate to, wow, I have helped change that life of that person. So every story from every angle creates engagement. And the model has a lot of story-based work in it, as well as coaching. It has like a peer coaching process that peers in an organization or between organizations can work with each other. It has all the guides and everything to coach each other on strategy for whoever you want to engage, because the process is an upward spiral. The process of engaging people goes upward and it moves people closer to the organization. It is nowhere, it's very different than a pyramid. It's like a different structure of connecting people. So why don't we show the slide, Nico, and then I can talk a little bit about it. So this is like, I have a whole PowerPoint that shows how this model develops, how it is put together. But this is just a strategy map that I use in organizations for them to literally, it's kind of like pin the tail on the donkey, like where you literally put a pin, like where are you with this person or this, maybe it's an underrepresented group, maybe it's a group of beneficiaries. How engaged are they? So the central core of this model is very similar to community-centric fundraising, as well as I think it has relationships with trust-based philanthropy, which is a whole other area that's coming out now, a new wonderful thing. The central core is the core of the organization, and more specifically, it is the transformational impact of the programs. In the core is the board and the programs, but also in the core is the transformational impact of the programs. So it's the organization and everything it does. And then around the core are the people who are traveling around, sharing stories, listening to stories, and then, usually with like a board member, a volunteer, staff person, they get asked questions along the way, or they hear a story from the board member or the donor that's walking them around, or the staff person, they hear a story, or they are observing something in the organization, like an event. So they're traveling around in a 360 to the organization. And as they go higher and higher, they're hearing more, they're getting more invested, they're connecting their values to the organization. And, ideally on the right, prospect follow-up, cultivation, those things are occurring. So this is, originally was created for fundraising. However, as I said, I realized like this can work for leadership. This can work for, finding a new board member and going through this process with them. It can also work for creating, like I had one organization I worked with, they created a leadership council by doing this process. All those people are all major donors now, but we know that 90% of volunteers make gifts. So this process can work. And it also, in another organization, I used it for staff engagement in a university, because in a university, a lot of people stay a really long time, and the invest, which is, in a nonprofit, typical nonprofit with donors, it would be a planned gift. However, and we know from what Pat has shared with me and others, that planned gifts can also start just from the identification, because they've already been making gifts for a long time. However, in a like organization where staffing is crucial, a legacy gift can be a scholarship fund that the person names. And maybe they just make a small gift, but it's because they've been working there for 20 years and they do that. So it's really interesting when you expand, like when there's just space to expand. So on the left, increased pace of engagement is because when the central core is clear, Like the goals are clear, the mission is clear, they've done strategic planning, they know where they're going, they're having a transformational impact, they're communicating. When all that's clear, it has an attraction effect on the people moving around it, which is how they get closer. There's an attraction. They hear the things that they need to hear to make more gifts. They read what they need to read. They interact in the ways they need to interact. So they get closer and closer to the organization. When a person makes or a donor, or whoever makes a legacy gift, they become, obviously, it's an endowment gift. They become part of the central core of the organization because the budget is in the central core of the organization. So that's kind of the concept of it. And organizations, I notice that as I work with people in organizations and teams, like fundraising teams with this model, they feel a lot more confident because they can say, okay, this is exactly where the person is. And we want to move them up here. And then we talk about what stories you already know, what are story opportunities to move them forward. And even the request for money is a story. Like it's a story. This is our vision story. So all of it is all story based. And yeah, so you can unshare that, Nico. Thank you.
So what I really love about this is that it is so engagement focused, because the traditional pyramid is, really the valuation is placed on the dollar. And I think all of us in nonprofit fundraising know that, somebody who's been making a $5,000 gift because that is like the absolute most that they can do, but they've been doing it for 15 years, should have a higher level of value than somebody who can walk in, cut you a $25,000 check one time, really not care too much about what it goes to, what you're doing, and like walk away. They're not gonna stick around. And so the value really does need to be placed on how engaged these donors are with your organization, because sometimes there is such a disconnect between somebody's capacity and somebody's love and commitment. And truly, when that love and commitment is there, that's when you're going to see those legacy gifts. It's when you're going to see them being all the things: a board member, your advocate, your ally. They're going to tell your story. They're going to invest their own money, and they're going to bring people into the pipeline. They're going to do all the things for you. And that's really what we strive for, is that consistency, that strong foundation. And Patricia, I love the way that you've worked it out to make that focus the engagement piece. So yay. And I'm so excited to read your book. I know that you're still editing it, and we don't have a pre-order set up, but after this, we will send out our recording of this, as well as an interest form. So if you're interested in learning more about Patricia's book when it comes out, getting on that pre-release list, we will send that out to everyone as well. But I just want to turn it back over to both of you for some final thoughts as we're closing in on our 25 minutes, and then we will open up to the room to see if there's any questions or comments.
Yeah, I just wanted to share. I mean, looking at both the things we've talked about and kind of I'm summarizing as you just did so lovely, but thinking about the donor pyramid as something that's multidimensional and kind of a living organism is what I think Patricia's model of storytelling and this moves management through engagement really allows for that, for the model or this way of thinking to be to really breathe and go with your organization. And that's kind of how I would encourage people to think about it, rather than a very two-dimensional upward climb removed process that becomes more transactional and removed from the cause and removed from the opportunity to bring community into your space, especially when we're in a time where fundraisers are really having to consider how diversity, equity, and inclusion are being blended into our longstanding processes. We can no longer use this flat two-dimensional way of thinking and expect for communities to come to us. So by thinking broader, by looking at engagement as the priority, you're opening a way of thinking, you're opening your nonprofit's accessibility to have more of an equitable approach, to look at new communities in your fundraising efforts, and break down the status quo of how things have always been done. And sometimes, I mean, we can talk theory all day, but these new ways of thinking allow us as fundraisers to communicate to our board, to break down these tools for fundraisers that aren't trained fundraisers. And so your volunteers, your advisory board, your campaign cabinet when you're in that position, they all need these resources and breakdowns so that they can do their job and demystify what seems so scary as an ask, but in reality is this engagement and is an opportunity for them to participate in this evolving, breathing moves management system. And so that's kind of how I'd encourage those listening, watching to consider it and see what we've brought forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Lauren. Yeah, I want to say a couple things too. So, thank you for the air, the it is a breathing, like my model is breathing. And honestly, I had a client organization tell me that on top of the model is another one, like surrounding it, another one, because all those people traveling around it are interacting externally and bringing other people up that then they later introduce to the organization. It's just like this expansive thing. The other thing that I noticed about, the move management two-dimensional pyramid is that there's no organization in it. In fact, there's nobody. There's only the isolated donor. Whereas in this model, people are interacting. I have this other piece where I show like little dotted lines, but people are interacting with each other. Like the board is interacting with the people that are traveling around. People are traveling around are interacting with each other. Like they're all interacting with the community. So it's actually is a representation of the community, like Lauren was talking about. I mean, it represents community. The other piece that's interesting about this, I think both Lauren and I sort of stumbled upon these things out of necessity. I mean, we just out of like what was just appearing before us. I kind of like the saying, bloom where you're planted. It's like, okay, these things are, what are we going to do about it? And then these things came up. So one of the things that came up was just totally accidentally. I noticed that if I step back with a team, a fundraising team, and just let them talk to each other, they're often able, when I'm keeping the space and the ground rules, they're able to work with each other and help each other think about how to strategically engage whoever they need to engage, right? Whether it's somebody who's going to have access or give access, whether it's a whole community, whether it's a person, they're able to do that. So that's why I created this peer coaching process. And I don't feel that I need to be there. I mean, yeah, it does sometimes help. I am a trained coach with 20 years experience, but people can do it on their own. They can totally do it. And the most amazing thing I found in my research, which I did about 7 years ago with 150 people, I think, is that people really likes to work with people outside their organization. Like a board member and an ED likes to work with another board member, ED, in another organization to go through the coaching process. They just kept the name confidential of the donor. I mean, but they were able to help each other strategically. And in both community-centric fundraising and in trust-based philanthropy, they talk about this, like, don't compete. Try to work together in whatever ways you can. And I know we are seeing some of that, which is great. The other thing I want to say is in trust-based philanthropy, they're finally talking about being partners, being partners with nonprofits. My entire model is all about creating partnership. And, some of you may remember that Tom Parker modeled being a partner. I mean, the Hutton Foundation, he absolutely modeled how to be a partner, like sitting in a group of nonprofits and saying, what do you guys need and how can we help you? I mean, I remember when he said that, I was like, God, he's really different than everybody else. I mean, but he also was in a great relationship with the head of the Santa Barbara Foundation at the time, Chuck Schlosser, and also Palmer Jackson. And they all together seemed to be able to play off each other and just be totally warm, heart-centered, and provide the kind of support that nonprofits needed. And so I think that's the kind of person my model creates. Like that's kind of relationship my model creates with people who have the tendency to be, open, to want to get engaged. So I think, and totally it works with boards. I mean, it doesn't have to be just staff learning this. Boards learn it. I've done this with many, many boards. So yeah, those are just some thoughts.
I love it. Yes. And I think just the bottom line is nobody wants to be treated like an ATM. And this is kind of a way that we really do not. We're not going to pinpoint you into a box within a pyramid and say, this is your value. This is where you go. And I thank you both so much for bringing so much new light and energy into something that's been so stagnant, and just this is the way we've always done it. And we are in this time and place where that's not okay anymore. And I thank you both for making these changes, even though you feel sometimes that you had to make these changes. I know, Lauren, you were scrambling in a capital campaign, but boy, did you do an amazing, amazing thing. And Patricia, truly cannot wait for the full book. The model is fantastic. So with that, I do want to open it up in case anybody has any questions or comments from the room. And we'll go from there.
I'll go ahead. Again, I'm from Ventura County, Child Development Resources, and I want to thank Lauren and Patricia for sharing your wisdom and experiences and thinking outside of the box as well in terms of how to approach fundraising effectively, most effectively. And I really love the idea of the community-centric fundraising model. And thank you for the diagram as well. Very enlightening. A few years ago at Cal Lutheran University, a professor friend of mine had his graduate students do an evaluation of all of our program offerings, services, etc. And they, as part of their class project, they pitched a kind of like PR approach. And their number one recommendation was talk less about the organization per se, talk about the people that you're serving and how they're directly benefiting from programs and services in their own words, and also collaborating with our child care provider community. About 800 providers provide services for early care and education in their homes to children, many of them low-income single mothers that are being enrolled in the program. So I really love it. Aligns with kind of our thinking. Honestly, we have not done a lot of this type of fundraising, either a capital campaign, but we've been talking about it more recently as part of our 2026 proactive plan. And we have a particular bucket that's dedicated to expanding the CDR assets, whether it's financial or facility driven. So we are definitely talking about that. One of the challenges that I'm having as a CEO is just that shift of mindset. The board of directors has always been very supportive, very cohesive. They're great ambassadors of the organization, but it seems like it hits a block wall when we start talking about fundraising and how they can assist. Any tips on that? Because that's an area in terms of engagement. You can't go out and engage the community if you don't fully engage, especially the leadership team here at our organization. I think it starts with myself, also our board members, but there's also a lot of talented individuals that can really speak to the storytelling of the clients we serve, et cetera. So any tips that you may have in terms of board engagement and that approach To
You want to go, Lauren, or
their
do you-
participation, right?
you go and then I'll go, yeah.
I'll go really quick just because I've case study on how I've been doing this capital campaign-esque model and pushing on that in our just annual fundraising. Because the board, my nonprofit, we're a fundraising board. All we do is support and raise funds for the public library. We don't put on programs. So they know that is their commitment when they sign up, and their ambassadors. But how I've integrated it into our development efforts is that I've dismantled our development committee, and I run all of our. So this is I've so far the only person I've talked to who's done something like this, and I run all of our fundraising efforts, our annual and our spring and our kind of monthly giving efforts as mini campaigns. And so I put together, and each year the board members can sign up to participate in one of the efforts that has a start and end date. So they know they're helping with the fundraising, they're on that committee, I call it task force. So basically they're like the mini campaign cabinet of that effort from this date to this date. And then the rest of the year, they kind of can sit back versus we need your help on the annual appeal. We need your help on the spring appeal. And then everyone's kind of getting exhausted, or the development committee's feeling like we always have to carry this load. What about the other people? So they are all on committees and they serve on these mini campaign task forces. And so I gather them at the beginning of the effort. We identify what the top needs are. And to integrate community-centric fundraising into it, our top goal is $25,000, let's say. But it's not, let's just go after one person for $25,000. Let's think creatively. Who are our most engaged people? Who can we come together possibly, and they can contribute a $25,000 gift collectively? And we can recognize them in our conversations as we go talk with people. So last year we were able to get 4 former board members to give collectively a $10,000 gift to our end of year efforts. So we were able to storytell and then empower other board members on this little team to share that story. You know, we have these board members who've remained engaged, and they X person gave because of their impact and the story that goes along with it of why they got involved and why the organization has grown since their participation. And it inspired others to give. And so that was that's an approach I've been doing in our annual efforts, and it's been really successful and engaging the board. I also, in typical capital campaign process as well, is I have the board members ask each other for their annual gift. So we have, they pick who they feel most comfortable talking to, and engage them with their join me type of conversation. And then they kind of get to shake off that fear of talking to people about contributing and going into the rest of the end of year efforts. So we're still testing some things out, but it's really opened up this community effort that it's not just the development people. And it really has broken down those fears of, I don't know how to ask for money. And we really get to practice. It's not asking for money. It's talking to your colleagues about why this work is important, and to your peers. And it becomes very peer to peer, and then community level along the way. So those are some tips in how I've integrated that year round.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. It's I feel like it's very doable when you take that approach. Thank you.
Love that, Lauren. That's really great. Yeah, really great. So for organizations where you have board members who join that they don't, where maybe it's not emphasized as much that they're going to be doing fundraising, that there's this wide range of things, their program, et cetera. Something that I have been called in a lot to do is to share my model and do a process developing stories with boards. So I'm about to do one in a few weeks again. But because, you know, many people, many nonprofits say, my board doesn't fundraise. Well, what's really interesting is that they don't necessarily need to directly fundraise. I mean, some people will, but they don't really all need to. Maybe out of a board of 15 people, maybe 2 people will directly ask for money. What everybody else needs to do is engage. So the model that I use, I actually have board members partner up and ask each other about a story, about their best experience in the organization, a time where they felt really engaged, involved, really moved. I mean, it's like they get a story. So each partner gets a story from the other partner, and they all share the stories at the meeting. So, you know, you have, you know, often about 10 people maybe, and they share these amazing stories that nobody ever heard. Nobody knew any of these stories. Everybody's extremely moved, even in crusty, long time, no term limit boards. They are crying. They are taking the Kleenex and wiping their eyes. Like, it's powerful because people are really getting into, like, I went to this event and they had a beneficiary speak. And I mean, they'll tell the whole thing, like how they felt and how that relates to when they were a child. And, you know, I mean, incredible. So then we take it and we distill it down to, like, each story gets distilled down to like 2 sentences. Here's why I'm on the board. And they get a little help. They get in groups and they distill each other's stories. They help each other. Then everybody has not a traditional elevator speech, but a real deep, personal, moving thing they can say, and then they can adjust it for the situation. And then they get assigned to, like, okay, we're having this event. You need to talk to like 5 people who are there and just either share your story or ask them a question. And here's a couple questions you can ask. That's all they have to do. It is amazing what happens after, because then the staff follow up after events like that and talk to these people. And these people say, wow, I had the most wonderful time at your event. I learned so much. I talked to so-and-so board member. And then, you can invite that person closer and closer and potentially ask for, a pretty large gift as you start to find out about them and what their interests are. And it's all through, questions, open-ended, powerful questions that are not, here's how much our organization raises, here's how many people. No, not facts. It's all narrative. It's all connecting to trust. So the interesting thing is that this method that I use, I did not make it up. It is called appreciative inquiry. I've changed it and developed it, but it is basically called appreciative inquiry. So it was studied about 11 or 12 years ago in neuroscience research, and it actually creates well-being. Like, actually asking these questions, interacting this way, actually creates this theme of well-being in 5 areas: positive relationships, engagement, positive emotions, meaning, and accomplishment. And those 5 things together create well-being. So one of my goals in working, because I've been working with nonprofit leaders for a really long time, and I was one myself, and I also experienced this, burnout is a big issue. But when you get to work in well-being and you get to ask these questions and listen to the answers, it's like story time. I mean, your well-being goes way up. Like, you're having milk and cookies there, listening, not to like talk about childcare, but you really are having like the Welch's grape juice and the graham crackers, and you're like listening to these wonderful stories and feeling, oh, this is why I do the work. So as a nonprofit leader, you get filled up by it. So that spreads through the organization, and then there's more well-being in the whole organization versus scarcity, fear, threat, all that stuff. It's all the positive stuff, which allows people to move in the same direction together. All from like a little 3-hour board session, honestly.
So I just a follow up to that. You mentioned in a couple of weeks you're going to be working with a nonprofit board. And so I'd be really interested in connecting with you offline to talk about that, because I have not planned out the next board retreat, but that would be a wonderful opportunity to carve out, minimum 2 or 3 hours, maybe more if necessary, to do this kind of capacity building that really is focused on just sharing with one another all the wonderful stories of their experiences as being a board member, and hearing indirectly and sometimes very directly from our program directors about the benefits of the programs to children and families. So yeah, that I like the motivational aspect of that approach as well. So thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
that's really awesome. I think that's really great. And just so you know, I did run as part of what I did as an executive director, we had 150 children in childcare. So yeah, so here's my email in the chat, patricia@patriciaschwartz.com. And so feel free to email me, and thank you, Jack. Yeah, it's great. It's really, I think, a time saver to work with your board because then you're not constantly pushing against the board, which is, yeah.
Well, fortunately, that I never feel that way, and that's a big word, never, but I don't ever feel pressured by the board. They're very supportive. I just don't, I think it's more of the fear of the unknown, what we're asking for them to do and help us with. But as soon as they understand that, they're on board 100%. So
That's great.
I'll definitely reach out to you. Thank you. Thank you again, both of you, for your presentation today. I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, and I think the best thing as somebody who was a staff member and fundraising was, what I was in charge of doing at all the organizations that I've worked at was actually having a board member come on asks, whether they're the one actually asking for money or not. Their presence means everything, because they are learning the story. They can hear, they have the partnership with the staff. They're showing how important that donor sitting in front of them is because they're giving up their time to be there. So I think if you can partner your staff with board members on asks, on community events, just getting them more ingrained, it really does help give that extra oomph, just having them there.
We had a couple of we had one longtime board member pass away in April, and she had been on our board for 20 years because we didn't have term limits for board. And, that community just rallying around her, we received a $50,000 one-time check in her honor, in Jan's honor. And then we had another similar situation where a community activist in one of our 10 cities in Santa Paula, we have a Head Start center named after this individual. And when they found out that he had passed away, I had maybe 4 or 5 phone calls from the community that saw, hey, you've honored Bob with the naming of the center, and I used to work with Bob, or I went to school with Bob. I had some firsthand experience. What can we do to donate to the organization in Bob's honor? And so we're in the midst of doing that now, but you guys have really illustrated the positiveness, and there's at so many levels when the community comes together. So whatever the cause might be.
Jack, I just want to share that something similar happened when I first moved back to Santa Barbara about 25 years ago, where I worked at La Casa de Maria, and they used to have 2 sites. So it was the new site, and that's why I was moved here to work there. So this Episcopal priest named George Barrett had passed away. He was one of the first people who ordained women. So La Casa de Maria is all these former nuns who got excommunicated from the church after the church said it's okay to be independent and be women. They said it was okay. The church said it was okay, but then they excommunicated. So they were kind of upset. So just, mildly upset there, and are still mildly upset. But George Barrett represented hope. And so he passed away, maybe a year after I started. So this big campaign happened. All these people who appreciated him, people who were completely underrepresented, who would never have contributed to any campaign. We raised $1.5 million to name one of our buildings the Barrett Center. It was really unbelievable. And it included these really high level donors who were neighbors who used to walk their dogs through the property, as well as nuns who never didn't believe in fundraising, but they gave money, and all kinds of people in between, all the people who, went to school, and those nuns were their teachers. I mean, you would not believe what it did. So I think you're really onto something. You're really onto something. You can think big. I say
Yeah.
think big.
And I also think that's another opportunity to, share what is it that CDR is doing to support the community. Because this one particular individual who reached out to me, she said, I got other friends that are reaching me. I want to be your liaison point person. But here's an opportunity not only to talk about what they would like to give in Bob's honor, but also how our families and children are benefiting by being enrolled in the program at other locations, right, throughout Ventura County. So we're looking at it from that standpoint also, and how they might be able to help with the engagement of the community in other areas as well, which really pushes the envelope in terms of Bob's legacy. And he was always about Ventura County first and family. So it wasn't just Santa Paula, it was the entire county. So we're starting to have conversations about that internally, how we could, leverage the tremendous community support. They reached out to us. So we're talking about that now.
I just wanted to quickly add on another example of something like that was successful in Santa Barbara. I think about the Forever Foothills project that raised $18 million in a few months. And the reason that was successful was, they were putting a lot of work into it, was the community rallied around it. And the community, people giving $2, kids selling bracelets to just participate and raise funds, is what secured those major donors and the high level leadership gifts in wanting to participate, knowing that the community cared. So if the community part is so critical to even those higher capacity folks who don't necessarily want to be recognized, but want to see that this is something that everyone cares about. So there's so many ways to look at the benefits of rallying the community in the efforts. But
Yeah.
Llewellyn, you have your hand.
Llewellyn, I see your hand up.
Yeah, hi. So thank you, Lauren and Patricia, so much for the information today. I just really appreciate how down to earth it all is and how it's reacting to the realities that we have today, but it's also like proactively creating something for the future that we're going to be able to just make like important necessary changes with. So thank you both. I wanted to ask a question because I'm not a fundraising professional myself. I'm a strategist. So I'm kind of taking all of this info, and instead of like viewing it from fundraising looking out, I'm viewing it from outside looking in towards fundraising, and wondering about like what ripple effects you've seen happening as you started to implement fundraising this way, like specifically from kind of like a nonprofit's logistical side of things. Like how does fundraising this way mean that you need to have a larger fundraising team? Does it mean that you have to like think differently about staffing, or like what are kind of those first ripple effects that you're starting to see happen in the organizations?
I'll speak briefly about what this has led to in my organization. I think in terms of needing a larger fundraising team, the volunteers, the board members, the community have become our fundraisers. And so in that sense, it's been, our network has been very powerful in supporting us. But where capacity has been needed is managing the follow-up and the letter writing and the more of the logistics admin side of things. So that's where I've needed more support in terms of fundraising. But really, I think if you're doing the community engagement piece in all aspects of this, your network is your resource, and you're really kind of the facilitator if this is successfully going in that direction. But it's all of the logistics piece that you need people paid and I mean, and volunteers if they're willing to help with thank you notes and all of those pieces, you know, engaging them in those ways.
Yeah. Yes. So a few thoughts. When, you know, the organizations I've worked with, sometimes they have nobody, like they're just all volunteers. But most of the time they have at least one development person. So what happens is once they start engaging people and asking for funds, they then need to have somebody to track. So they need like a part-time logistics person, but they can pay for it because they have these gifts. And eventually they need a development person. They're like the executive. They need a development person. I have seen this happen mostly in the organizations that I've worked with for more than 6 months, like the ones I worked with a year or 3 years. I worked with one organization for 6 years, another one for 4 years. These organizations grow because every time they get another group of major donors, they need somebody to work with those major donors and steward them. And so it does grow, the process. There was this one study like 4 years, 5 years ago, Chronicle of Philanthropy, I think. And they said the best thing you can invest in is your staff in fundraising, because it will give you the highest return on investment, or capacity in fundraising. So it doesn't have to be, it could be consultants or staff, but having people do things. I know I've tracked my own, as an external person who just really does, consult coaching for major gifts. I've just tracked like what happens, and, they might pay me some amount of money and they end up raising, 100 times that amount of money. The same thing with, Pat. I know for sure with Pat, they are, these major planned gifts, right? And then with a staff person, it's the same thing. They pay a staff person a certain amount, but that staff person over time, I mean, not in the first month, but, over a year or 18 months, there are gifts that absolutely pay for that position. So, and there was an initial gift probably that funded it or seeded it. So yeah, it does grow and it goes forward. And you can also totally use volunteers. You can completely use volunteers, which I have also done in my career. So.
All right. Well, we're at 11, so I'm gonna say thank you both again so much. Thank you everybody for being here. If anybody has additional questions for Lauren or Patricia, we will send out an email following this with the recording and have their contact information, as well as information about Patricia's upcoming book. But thank you all again so much and have a lovely rest of your Wednesday.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you guys for showing up.
Thanks, Patricia.
Take care. Bye.